That old tattoo looks like nothing special. A group sitting at the center table of the restaurant chuckled softly, glancing toward the old man sitting alone in the corner. The elderly man was thin with snow-white hair, wearing a worn-out jacket, his left arm revealing a faded tattoo. He said nothing, just holding his glass of water. But minutes later, a young Navy SEAL walked in. And when his eyes stopped on that tattoo, the entire room suddenly fell silent. And you stand up or turn away like everyone else. Sunday morning, the New Holland Central restaurant was packed with people. It was discount day for veterans. In a corner table, an elderly man in his 80s, thin with a metal prosthetic leg, sat quietly with a small tray of food and a glass of water. His name was Robert Ellis, once a logistics technician in the SEAL Special Forces in 1969. He wore no uniform, no badges, just a faded brown jacket and an old tattoo on his left wrist. A dagger crossed through an anchor. 4 middle-aged men at the nearby table glanced over while eating. I bet he just drew that himself. That tattoo looks ancient. What kind of soldier doesn't have a veteran's card? A server approached, bowing her head gently. I'm sorry. Someone complained that you're making others uncomfortable. Could you please sit in the outdoor area? Sir Robert remained silent, just nodding slightly. He picked up his tray and stood struggling toward the door. Right hand holding the tray, left hand gripping his cane, limping as he walked. A child in line asked his father, Dad, why does that man walk so strangely? The father pulled his child closer, whispering, Just a homeless person. Don't pay attention. As Mr. Ellis passed the table with the group of men, one deliberately spoke loud enough. If he's really a SEAL, then I must be a general. The entire table burst into laughter. Robert didn't react. Only a single tear fell from his chin to the tile floor. No one stopped him. No one asked. The manager watched from behind the counter, hesitating, but then turned away to help another customer. Robert's shoulders slumped slightly as he pushed the door with his shoulders struggling to balance his tray, his cane, and his dignity all at once. The sunlight outside was harsh, making him squint as he looked for an empty table in the outdoor seating area, which was nearly empty despite the pleasant weather. Perhaps that was why they wanted him there out of sight, where his presence wouldn't disturb the other patrons. Each step was a small battle. The prosthetic leg that had served him for decades creaked slightly, needing maintenance he couldn't afford. His pension barely covered his rent and medications. A waitress watched through the window, her young face troubled. She had only been working at the restaurant for 2 weeks, but something about the way the old man carried himself, despite the humiliation, struck her. There was a dignity there buried beneath years of neglect and dismissal. Robert found a small table near the edge of the patio, carefully setting down his tray before lowering himself into the metal chair. The food was already getting cold. Eggs and toast, a simple Veterans Day special that he had saved up to enjoy. He looked back through the window at the bustling restaurant. Inside, people laughed and talked, sharing stories and meals. Out here, it was just him and the occasional car passing by. This was not new to him. This separation, this invisible wall between him and others who couldn't see beyond his appearance. I apologize for getting emotional as I write this. A man who once protected our freedom, now facing such injustice. Robert Ellis had served as military personnel in SEAL Team Bravo, responsible for technical support and supplies during deep territory missions. He lost a leg during a logistics coordination mission when he hit a landmine at the Laotian border in 1971. The day he returned home, there was no welcoming ceremony, no public medals. Many of his missions remained classified as top secret. He lived quietly, opening a small auto repair shop in Colorado, living by the work of his remaining hands. For 30 years, he consistently helped young people, teaching them trades, fixing cars for free for poor neighbors, but never speaking about his military past. He carried only his small tattoo and a yellowed letter, a handwritten note from his former commander, that read, "Thank you to the most silent soldier I have ever commanded." Each year he visited a different restaurant to have a meal on Veterans Day. Not for the discount, but to honor the memory of a friend who fell with him during that mine explosion. Yet every year he was misunderstood, driven away like an old beggar. Robert never complained. He never corrected anyone. The soft-spoken mechanic simply moved on, carrying the weight of memories that few would ever understand. His neighbors knew him only as Old Rob, with a good heart. The man who fixed their children's bicycles for free and never missed saying good morning. What they didn't know was that the limp in his step came from saving 3 men during an extraction gone wrong, or that the scars on his hands were from pulling wounded soldiers from burning vehicles. The restaurant he chose today was special. It was where his fallen friend had promised they would eat when they returned home, a promise made the night before their final mission together. Back in 1971, Robert and his team had been tasked with establishing a supply route for field operatives deep in hostile territory. The mission was classified but essential for providing medical supplies and ammunition to forward teams. James Harrington, Robert's closest friend in the unit, had carried a photograph of this very restaurant in his pocket. "Best burgers in New Holland," he would say. "When we get home, I'm buying the first round." They were just 8 miles from extraction when they hit the minefield. Robert was navigating using hand-drawn maps and his exceptional memory for terrain. James was point man. The explosion threw Robert 30 Forsters. When he regained consciousness, the medic was already working on what remained of his leg. Through the haze of pain, he saw the body bag being zipped over James's face. 4 other men were wounded that day, but they all came home alive because Robert, despite his injury, had remembered the extraction coordinates and guided the medevac helicopter to their location through heavy radio interference. His technical skills, the ones that some dismissed as not real combat, saved 5 lives that day. But he couldn't save James. So each year on the anniversary, Robert found a restaurant. Sometimes he could afford a burger, sometimes just coffee. But he would sit and remember and honor a promise that only he was left to keep. The tattoo the dagger through an anchor wasn't standard SEAL insignia. It was something their small unit had designed, a personal emblem that only the 8 of them wore. Now, as far as Robert knew, he might be the last one living who carried it. As Robert reached the doorstep, the back door opened. A young soldier in black civilian clothes, with a high and tight haircut and decisive gait, walked in. His name was Jackson Miles, 27 years old, currently a combat SEAL home on leave for a few weeks. Jackson noticed the old man limping away with the distinctive tattoo clearly visible on his left wrist. He froze, eyes widening. "Excuse me, sir. Were you with SEAL Team Bravo?" Robert startled slightly, looking up. "Long time ago, but yes, I was part of it." Jackson stood at attention, giving a proper military salute in the middle of the buzzing restaurant. "Sir, you're the one they tell us about at training camp. You're Ellis G7, aren't you?" Mr. Ellis was too choked up to speak. Jackson turned toward the service counter. "This restaurant has no right to ask him to leave. If anyone feels uncomfortable in the presence of a living legend, perhaps they should step outside for some air." The group at the nearby table flushed red with embarrassment. One quickly stood up and left. An elderly woman nearby slowly rose to her feet, applauding. Then an entire row of other patrons stood as well. Robert said nothing, but he gently squeezed Jackson's hand. "Thank you, son." Just one person recognizing, "That's enough." Jackson wasn't finished. He walked to the center of the restaurant and spoke clearly. "This man before you coordinated the extraction of 17 wounded soldiers during Operation Swift Curran. The tattoo he wears was earned in blood, not bought in a shop. I stand here today because men like him created the standards we now follow." The restaurant fell completely silent. Coffee cups paused midway to lips. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. All eyes were fixed on the young SEAL and the old man by the door. In training, Jackson continued, "They teach us about the shadow teams, the men who made impossible missions possible. Robert Ellis designed extraction protocols that we still use today. His supply route planning saved more lives than most frontline medics." The manager approached, visibly shaken. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. Your meal today is on the house, and we would be honored if you would accept our invitation to return whenever you wish." Robert smiled slightly and shook his head. "No need for special treatment. I just came to remember a friend," Jackson asked softly. "May I join you, sir? I'd be honored to hear about your friend." Robert nodded, and they moved to a quiet table in the corner. Not the outside seating, but the best table in the house. From across the room, the four men who had laughed earlier watched in silence. One by one they stood and quietly left the restaurant, leaving their meals half-finished. The waitress who had watched through the window approached the table with fresh coffee. "I'm so sorry about earlier," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My grandfather was in Vietnam, too. He never talked about it." Robert looked up at her, seeing something familiar in her eyes. "What was his name?" he asked gently. "James Harrington," she replied. "I never met him. He died before I was born." Robert's hand shook as he reached for his wallet, pulling out a worn photograph. "Your grandfather," he said softly, "promised to buy me a burger here someday." He swung a week later. The town newspaper featured a small article. "The Old Soldier and the Salute That Silenced an Entire Restaurant." The photograph capturing the moment Jackson saluted Mr. Robert spread across social media, attracting millions of shares. The community began visiting that restaurant to ask about Mr. Ellis. Many were surprised to learn he lived just 3 blocks away. A group of school children sent handwritten letters to his home saying they wanted to hear him tell stories about those who had sacrificed. Jackson returned to his base, but every month sent a handwritten letter to Robert. The following spring, the town organized a ceremony honoring 12 silent veterans, with Robert being the first invited to speak. He only said, "I don't represent anyone. I'm just someone who tried to do the right thing and lived quietly." In the audience, Jackson stood in the middle row, silent hand placed over his heart. What began as a simple moment of recognition transformed the town. Robert's Auto Shop became a gathering place where veterans could find not just free repairs, but understanding without words. When local schools needed a speaker for Memorial Day, Robert would arrive quietly, never talking about himself, but about the meaning of service and the importance of remembering those who never return. The tattoo that once drew mockery became a symbol recognized throughout the community, replicated on a small plaque outside the town hall with the words, "Honor the Quiet Ones." Jackson's naval career flourished, but he never forgot his connection to Robert. During training sessions with new recruits, he would share the story of the old logistics officer who had created supply routes that saved countless lives. On Robert's 85th birthday, a surprise awaited at his door. Jackson, now an instructor, stood alongside 7 young SEALs who had traveled to meet the man behind the stories they'd heard. Most surprising of all was Sarah Harrington, the waitress from that day, who had brought her family to meet the man who had served alongside her grandfather. He would have been proud to know his granddaughter met you. Robert told her, his voice steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. The town renamed the street where Robert's shop stood to Silent Service Way. Not just for him, but for all those whose contributions happened behind the scenes beyond the spotlight. When Robert passed away 3 years later, his funeral was attended by hundreds, many wearing small pins depicting a dagger through an anchor. His coffin was carried by Jackson and 5 other active duty SEALs with full military honors that had been denied him for decades. The old prosthetic leg that had carried him through years of quiet service was replaced in his coffin with a new one provided by a veterans organization that had been inspired by his story to improve medical care for aging veterans. And on his tombstone, beneath his name and dates, were simple words that summed up a lifetime. His silence spoke volumes. His service changed lives. If this moment made your heart stop, maybe it's time we stop forgetting those who gave everything in silence. Subscribe to TT Soul Stories for more veteran stories and touching stories that still echo in our hearts.